Luyando was a bright and kind-hearted girl who lived with her father, Baba Themba, in the peaceful village of Nsumba. Her father was a respected carpenter, known for his skill and honesty. Life had not been easy for them, especially after Luyando's mother passed away when she was just 5 years old. Baba Themba did his best to raise his daughter with love and care, but loneliness crept into his heart as the years went by. Wanting companionship and a motherly figure for Luyando, he decided to remarry. That was how Nkufa came into their lives. Nkufa was a woman of striking beauty, but beneath her charming smile lay a heart filled with selfishness and greed. She brought along her own daughter, Tsepo, a girl the same age as Luyando, but with a vastly different upbringing. While Luyando was gentle and humble, Tsepo was spoiled and arrogant. Baba Themba, eager to create a happy home, welcomed Nkufa and Tsepo with open arms, believing they would form a loving family. But he was blind to the envy and malice that Nkufa secretly harbored. From the very first day, Nkufa made it clear that she saw Luyando as nothing more than an unwanted burden. Whenever Baba Themba was around, she pretended to be a caring stepmother, but the moment he left for work, her true nature was revealed. She assigned Luyando endless chores, forcing her to fetch water, scrub the floors, and cook meals while Tsepo lounged around like a queen. "Why should my daughter dirty her hands when there is a servant in the house?" Nkufa would sneer. Luyando endured the mistreatment in silence, knowing that complaining would only make things worse. She often ate leftovers while Tsepo enjoyed freshly prepared meals. Her clothes were old and tattered, while Tsepo wore fine fabrics that Baba Themba had unknowingly bought for both of them. But what hurt Luyando the most were the cruel words that Nkufa and Tsepo constantly hurled at her. "You are nothing, just like your useless mother," Nkufa would say with a smirk. Tsepo would laugh, adding, "No one will ever love you. You'll probably end up as a servant your whole life." Despite the pain, Luyando found comfort in her father's love. Baba Themba, unaware of the suffering his daughter endured, tried his best to provide for her. He saw great potential in her and worked tirelessly to save money for her education. He wanted her to have the best opportunities, believing that education was the key to a better future. But Nkufa could not stand the thought of Luyando succeeding. She wanted all of Baba Themba's resources to be spent on Tsepo alone. Her jealousy grew stronger when she discovered that Baba Themba had saved enough to send Luyando to one of the best schools in the city. That night, she sat beside him and weaved a web of lies. "She is ungrateful, my husband," Nkufa sighed, pretending to be heartbroken. "I have tried to love her like my own, but she is rebellious. She disrespects me and treats Tsepo badly. I fear she will bring shame to our family." Baba Themba frowned, troubled by her words. He had never seen Luyando behave in such a way, but Nkufa's tears convinced him that something had to be done. "Perhaps a change of environment will help," Nkufa suggested. "Send her to your brother in another town. She will learn discipline and appreciation." Blinded by his trust in Nkufa, Baba Themba agreed. The decision shattered Luyando's heart. When he broke the news to her, she felt betrayed, but said nothing. She knew her stepmother had won. With tear-filled eyes, she packed her few belongings and left the only home she had ever known, vowing to prove that she was worth far more than they believed. Life became a daily struggle for Luyando the moment Nkufa stepped into their home. Instead of finding the love and care of a new mother, she was treated like an outsider, a burden that needed to be dealt with. Nkufa wasted no time in showing her true colors. While she acted kind and gentle in front of Baba Themba, the moment he left for work, her mask slipped. She turned Luyando into nothing more than a servant. Tsepo, her daughter, was treated like a princess. She wore the finest clothes, ate the best meals, and was never asked to lift a finger. Meanwhile, Luyando was given old rags to wear, clothes that were either too big or too small, handed down after they had lost their beauty. Her meals consisted of leftovers, the scraps that Nkufa and Tsepo didn't want. On some nights, if she was too slow in finishing her chores, she wasn't given any food at all. But hunger was not the worst part. It was the cruelty, the insults, the way they made her feel worthless. Nkufa never missed a chance to remind Luyando that she was unwanted. "You are nothing," she would sneer, her voice dripping with hatred. "You will grow up to be a servant just like your useless mother." Tsepo joined in the mockery, laughing as she watched Luyando scrub the floors or wash their dirty clothes. "Maybe we should sell her as a maid," Tsepo would joke. "No one will ever marry a girl like her anyway." Every day, Luyando woke up before dawn to begin her endless list of chores. She fetched water from the stream, cooked meals she wasn't allowed to eat, cleaned every corner of the house, and still had to endure insults from her stepmother and stepsister. The only time she felt peace was when she was alone, looking at the stars at night, whispering to the mother she had lost. Despite everything, she never cried in front of them. She refused to give them the satisfaction. Deep in her heart, she held onto a silent promise. One day, she would prove them wrong. Baba Themba loved his daughter deeply. Even though he did not see the pain she carried in her heart, he worked hard every day, carving wood, building furniture, and repairing houses, all to provide for his family. No matter how tired he was, he always found time to check on Luyando, asking about her day and encouraging her to dream big. He saw something special in her. She was bright, hard-working, and eager to learn. He believed that education was the key to her future, so he began saving every little coin he could to send her to the best school in the city. Whenever he spoke about his plans, Luyando's eyes would light up with hope. She longed for a life beyond the walls of their home, where she was nothing but a servant to her stepmother and stepsister. She imagined herself sitting in a classroom, reading books, and building a future that no one could take away from her. Baba Themba's love and belief in her were the only things that kept her going. But Nkufa was furious. She had no interest in Luyando's education or future. In her eyes, only her daughter, Tsepo, deserved such opportunities. If there was money to send one child to school, it had to be Tsepo, not the orphan girl she despised. Every time Baba Themba talked about enrolling Luyando in the city school, Nkufa's jealousy burned hotter. She knew she had to act fast before her husband wasted more resources on the girl she saw as nothing but a nuisance. One night, after dinner, she sat beside Baba Themba with a heavy sigh, pretending to be troubled. "My husband," she began in a soft, sorrowful voice, "I have tried my best to love Luyando as my own, but she does not respect me. She is growing rebellious, and I fear she will bring shame to our family." Baba Themba frowned, surprised by her words. "Luyando, that cannot be. She has always been a good child." Nkufa shook her head and wiped fake tears from her eyes. "She acts sweet in front of you, but when you are away, she refuses to listen. She is ungrateful for everything you do for her. She speaks back to me, and she looks at Tsepo with envy in her eyes. I worry that one day she will cause trouble." Baba Themba was silent for a long time. He loved his daughter, but he also trusted his wife. If what Nkufa said was true, then maybe he had been too blind to see it. Nkufa saw the hesitation on his face and knew she had planted the seed of doubt. Baba Themba struggled with the words his wife had told him. He loved Luyando dearly, but if what Nkufa said was true, then maybe he had failed to discipline her properly. Maybe sending her away for a while would teach her to be more obedient and respectful. It was a painful decision, but he convinced himself that it was for her own good. One evening, he sat Luyando down and gently held her hands. "My child," he said softly, "I have decided to send you to live with your uncle in another town. He will take care of you, and when you are older, you can return." Luyando's heart dropped. "But Baba, why?" she asked, her voice trembling. Baba Themba sighed and looked away. "It will be better for you," he said. "You will have a fresh start, and your uncle will guide you." Luyando knew this was not her father's decision alone. She could feel Nkufa's shadow behind it, her invisible hand pulling the strings. She glanced at her stepmother, who stood in the corner, pretending to look concerned, but Luyando could see the hint of satisfaction in her eyes. Tsepo smirked, barely hiding her excitement. Tears welled in Luyando's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying would not change anything. She had no choice but to accept her fate. That night, she packed the few belongings she owned, a small bundle of clothes, a pair of worn-out shoes, and the wooden comb her mother had given her before she died. When the morning sun rose, Baba Themba took her to the village outskirts, where a trader traveling to the next town had agreed to take her along. As she climbed onto the cart, she turned to her father one last time, hoping he would change his mind. But he only gave her a sad smile and placed a few coins in her hand. "Be strong, my child," he said. "One day, you will understand." Luyando nodded, her heart aching. She wanted to beg him to take her back home, to see the truth about Nkufa, but she knew it would be useless. Instead, she made a silent promise to herself. One day, she would prove them all wrong. Arriving in the city was both exciting and terrifying for Luyando. Everything was bigger, louder, and faster than the quiet village she had left behind. Her uncle, Uncle Jemba, welcomed her into his modest home, but he made it clear that life here would not be easy. He was not a rich man, and though he would provide shelter and food, she had to work hard and prove herself. Luyando did not complain. She knew this was her only chance to change her life. She threw herself into her studies, waking up before sunrise to revise her books and staying up late to complete her schoolwork. She was determined to be the best student, to show everyone, especially her father, that she was worth more than what Nokufa had made her out to be. But studying alone was not enough. She soon realized that life in the city required money, and Uncle Jemba could not afford to give her more than the basics. So after school, while other children went home to rest, Luyando searched for work. She found small jobs, cleaning houses, running errands for shop owners, and even washing clothes for busy families. The work was tiring, but she never complained. Every coin she earned, she saved, knowing it would help her build the future she dreamed of. Some days, she was so exhausted that she could barely keep her eyes open in class. But whenever she felt like giving up, she reminded herself why she was doing this. She could not rely on her father's protection anymore. No one was coming to save her. If she wanted a better life, she had to fight for it. As the years passed, her hard work started to pay off. She became one of the top students in her school, earning the admiration of her teachers and classmates. People began to notice the quiet girl who never gave up, the girl who refused to let her past define her. And deep in her heart, she knew this was only the beginning. Years passed, and Luyando's determination never wavered. She studied harder than ever, refusing to let any obstacle stand in her way. While others took breaks, she spent extra hours reading, learning, and preparing for a future she knew she had to create for herself. When the day of her graduation arrived, she stood proudly as the top student in business and finance. It was a moment she had dreamed of for years, proof that she had turned her pain into strength. With her excellent grades and strong reputation, it did not take long for her to secure a job at one of the biggest companies in the city. At first, she was just an entry-level employee, given small tasks and expected to follow orders. But Luyando was not one to stay unnoticed. She worked harder than everyone else, solving problems, coming up with smart ideas, and proving that she was not just another ordinary worker. Her intelligence and leadership skills quickly caught the attention of the company's top executives. Within a few years, she rose through the ranks, earning promotions one after another. People respected her, admired her sharp mind, and saw in her the qualities of a true leader. But Luyando wanted more. She did not just want to work for others. She wanted to build something of her own. Using the knowledge she had gained and the connections she had made, she took a bold step and started her own company. At first, people doubted her. They thought she was too young, too inexperienced to run a business, but she proved them wrong. With careful planning, hard work, and an unshakable belief in herself, her company grew. Investors noticed her brilliance, and soon, money started pouring in. In just a few years, she became one of the most successful businesswomen in the city. She was no longer the poor, mistreated girl from Nsumba. She was now a powerful woman, respected and admired by many. And as she stood in her grand office, looking out at the city skyline, she knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning of an even greater journey. Back in the village of Nsumba, life had taken a bitter turn for Nokufa and her daughter, Tsepo. After Baba Themba's death, Nokufa wasted no time in claiming everything he had left behind. She believed that with his savings and possessions, she and Tsepo would live comfortably. She spent money carelessly, buying expensive clothes, fine jewelry, and throwing lavish gatherings to show off her wealth. She never once thought about saving for the future. Nokufa had always been certain that Tsepo would marry a rich man. She had raised her daughter to believe she was too good for ordinary men, so whenever a young man came seeking her hand in marriage, Tsepo would turn up her nose and find a reason to reject him. "He is not wealthy enough," she would say. "He does not deserve me." She was convinced that one day, a rich man from the city would sweep her off her feet and give her the luxurious life she deserved. But years passed, and no such man came. The wealthy suitors they had hoped for never arrived, and those who had once been interested lost patience with Tsepo's arrogance. Word spread in the village about how prideful she was, and soon, no man wanted to marry her. Even those who had little to offer chose humble and hard-working wives over her. Meanwhile, Nokufa's wealth slowly vanished. Without Baba Themba's steady income, she had nothing left to support herself. The money she had wasted on luxuries was gone, and the house that once felt grand and full of life now seemed empty and cold. At first, she tried to borrow from neighbors, but people in the village had not forgotten how cruel she had been. They whispered behind her back, shaking their heads whenever she passed. Some even laughed at her misfortune. remembering the days when she walked around with pride, treating others like they were beneath her. Now, Nkufa struggled just to buy food. She, who once mocked Luyando for being worthless, now found herself in a position where she had nothing. The hands that once pointed in scorn now trembled as she reached out, hoping for kindness from the same people she had looked down upon. But kindness was not so easily given to someone who had never shown it herself. Desperation had taken over Nkufa's life. She had sold almost everything of value in her home, but it was never enough. Food became scarce, and she and Seppo often went to bed hungry. The once proud woman who used to boast about her wealth now looked worn and tired. Her fine clothes had turned into rags, and her beauty had faded under the weight of suffering. One morning, as she sat outside her crumbling house, she overheard some women talking about a new business in the city that was hiring workers. "They say the owner is young, but very powerful," one woman said. "She pays well and treats her workers fairly." Hope flickered in Nkufa's heart. Maybe this was her chance. If she could get a job, she could earn enough money to survive. She might even rebuild her life. Without hesitation, she decided to travel to the city, using the last of her savings for the journey. The city was overwhelming. The bright lights, the rushing crowds, the towering buildings. It all felt unfamiliar and cold, but Nkufa pushed forward, asking for directions until she found the grand office of the company. She looked up at the impressive building, feeling a mixture of fear and excitement. If she could convince the owner to give her a chance, maybe she could start over. Dressed in old, tattered clothes, she stepped inside, keeping her head down so no one would judge her appearance. She joined a long line of people waiting to be interviewed, trying her best to look humble and desperate. When it was finally her turn, she walked into the office, her heart pounding in her chest. She had no idea that the person sitting behind the desk was the very girl she had once tormented. Nkufa walked into the grand office with unsteady steps. Her heart pounded as she clutched the edge of her worn-out wrapper, hoping no one would notice how out of place she looked in such a luxurious setting. The room was large and elegant, with tall glass windows that overlooked the city skyline. The air smelled of wealth and success, a world completely different from the misery she had been living in. She kept her head down, afraid to meet the eyes of the people around her. All she needed was a chance, a job. Any job. She would sweep floors, wash toilets, carry heavy loads, anything to earn money and survive. With a deep breath, she stepped forward as her name was called. But the moment she lifted her head, the air was sucked from her lungs. Sitting behind the massive desk was Luyando, the girl she had once bullied, insulted, and cast aside like dirt, was now in a position of absolute power. Dressed in an elegant suit, Luyando's presence was commanding. She was no longer the timid, helpless girl from Nsumba. She was a woman of wealth, success, and dignity. Nkufa's legs trembled, and her body felt weak. She stared in shock, unable to believe what she was seeing. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Luyando leaned back in her chair, her eyes sharp, her lips curling into a smirk. "Stepmother, is that you?" she asked, her voice calm but filled with meaning. Tears filled Nkufa's eyes as she dropped to her knees, shaking. The shame was unbearable. She had spent years calling Luyando worthless, treating her like nothing. Now, she was kneeling before the very girl she had tried to break. "Please forgive me," Nkufa sobbed, her voice broken with desperation. "I had no choice. I need this job. I will do anything." But Luyando remained still, watching the woman who had once tormented her now begging at her feet. For the first time in her life, Nkufa had no power, no pride, only regret. Luyando leaned forward, resting her elbows on the polished desk as she studied the woman kneeling before her. For years, she had dreamed of this moment, the day her stepmother would finally understand the pain she had caused. But now that it was here, she felt no joy, only a deep sense of justice. Nkufa trembled, her hands pressed together in a desperate plea. Her once proud face was thin and weary, her eyes filled with fear. She had never imagined that the girl she had tormented would one day hold such power over her. Luyando tapped her fingers against the desk, pretending to think. "You always said I was worthless," she said slowly, her voice carrying the weight of the past, "that I would never amount to anything. But look at you now, kneeling before me." Nkufa's lips quivered as fresh tears streamed down her cheeks. "I was wrong," she whispered. "I was blinded by my own pride. Please forgive me." Luyando tilted her head. "Tell me, stepmother, why should I help you?" Nkufa sobbed harder. She had no answer, no excuse. She had treated Luyando cruelly, never once showing kindness or love, and now fate had turned against her. The room was silent, except for Nkufa's weeping. The weight of her past sins pressed down on her, and for the first time in her life, she truly understood what it meant to be powerless. Days passed, and the news of Nkufa's humiliation spread quickly. But she was not the only one who had fallen. Tsepo, once proud and arrogant, had also lost everything. Without her mother's stolen wealth and her father's protection, she had no one to rely on. One afternoon, just as Luyando was leaving her office, she heard a familiar voice. "Luyando, please wait!" The voice was shaky, desperate. Luyando turned, and there stood Tsepo. Her fine clothes were gone, replaced by a faded dress full of holes. Her once glowing skin was dull, her hair unkempt. She no longer walked with confidence. She looked tired, broken, and afraid. Tsepo fell to her knees, just as her mother had done. "Luyando, please. I was young. I didn't know better. Forgive me," she pleaded. "I have nothing left. I need your help." Luyando stared down at her stepsister, the same girl who had mocked her, stolen her food, and laughed at her suffering. Memories of the past rushed through her mind. Tsepo wearing fine clothes while she wore rags. Tsepo eating the best meals while she was given scraps. Now, the roles were reversed. A bitter smile formed on Luyando's lips. "You need my help?" she repeated. "Tell me, Tsepo, did you ever help me when I needed it?" Tsepo bowed her head in shame. She had no answer. "I gave you nothing but kindness," Luyando continued, "and in return, you treated me like dirt. Now, you expect me to forget everything." Tsepo wept, but Luyando's heart remained cold. "Go," she said firmly. "I have no pity for you." Tsepo begged a little longer, but Luyando had already turned away. She walked past her without another glance, leaving her stepsister in the dust. With no home, no money, and no one to help them, Tsepo and Nkufa were left to beg on the streets, the same way they once humiliated Luyando. Now, they were the ones feeling the sting of rejection, the pain of being treated as nothing. And as they sat by the roadside, hungry and hopeless, they finally understood the lesson life had given them. Luyando did not waste her time thinking about Nkufa and Tsepo anymore. She had already given them their chance, and they had thrown it away. Instead, she focused on something far more important, using her success to help those who truly needed it. She returned to Nsumba, not as the helpless girl everyone had once pitied, but as a powerful woman with a purpose. She built schools so that children from poor families could get an education. She opened a community center where widows and struggling mothers could learn skills to support themselves. She provided jobs for hardworking people who had been overlooked, just like she once had been. The villagers whispered among themselves every time they saw her. They had once looked down on her, calling her pitiful and unfortunate. Now they spoke of her with admiration and respect. "Do you see her?" they would say. "That is Luyando, the girl they called worthless. Look at her now. She is greater than all of us." And of course, they also gossiped about Nkufa and Tsepo. Some pitied them, while others said it was nothing but karma. "She used to walk around like a queen," one woman would say. "Now, she begs for food like a common thief." Luyando never paid attention to such talk. She had no time for bitterness or revenge. She had already won, not by making Nkufa and Tsepo suffer, but by proving that she was never the failure they thought she would be. She never looked back. Instead, she walked forward, leaving behind the pain of the past and embracing the bright future she had built for herself.